Welcome to the SafePodcast. I'm your host, Jamie Teilmann, joined today by SafePaaS CEO Adil Khan and Director of Client Services, Vrinder Randhawa. In 2026, non-human identities, that is, service accounts, APIs, bots, and AI agents, now outnumber human workers in many enterprises and quietly run a huge share of ERP, finance, and supply chain activity. The question is shifting from who has access to what is executing this transaction and under whose authority. Today, we're talking about how we got here, why this non-human workforce is reshaping risk, and what the practical governance blueprint looks like. Adil, let's start with what's driving this explosion in non-human identities and how it's changing the risk landscape.
Hey, Jamie. Yeah, it's a really important topic to our clients, and I'm glad we're taking this on today's podcast. So what we're seeing is a structural shift underway. And it's driven from the top. The board, the chief executives, the C-suites are under intense pressure to deliver on AI and accelerate digital transformation, so that the mandate flows down to every team to adopt agents, build integrations, automate workflows, and show results and gains as a result of this productivity boom that we're all expecting from AI. That creates a frenzy of introducing bots, APIs, RPAs, go on and on, co-pilots into your mission critical, business critical systems. And this isn't brand new, by the way. For example, I mentioned APIs and RPAs. They have been embedded in the enterprise systems over the decade that we've been helping our clients with identity, security, risk management, governance. But the pace is exploding. It's gone exponential. The real change is that so much of the execution inside your key systems, like your ERP, your financials, your supply chain, etc., is now performed by non-humans. Those identities that never go through the hiring process, the background checks, the onboarding and offboarding, the traditional, cycles that we're also used to of controlling and managing, they just accumulate. And that's why the control question is shifting from who has access, what is executing this activity, with what authority, and how is that authority governed? Vrinder?
That's exactly it, Adil. Every digital initiative, transformation, whether that's ERP modernization, SaaS adoption of some kind, cloud migrations, robotic process automations, AI agents, to your point a moment ago, create more noise, more machine identities, integrations, overlaps, less discretion, workflows, scripts, agents, connectors. I'm sure I could, pull, all of us here on this, this podcast could pull many, many more out of that, right? And each one needs credentials, roles, permissions, and those execution rights in order to do the job that it is designed to do. But unlike people, they don't leave when staff turns over. They remain permanently attached to the functions of your organization. And that's important because that persistent connection is the issue, right? It's the crux of the issue, because traditional governance frameworks were built around human risks. People come into work, they might log on, it's very binary, right? You might log on from home externally, it's very binary. So they don't naturally account for this volume and permanence. And where we used to ask, in terms of compliance, or, which user can perform this action, one now has to ask what non-human identity is actually executing this function, how powerful it is, and who is on the hook effectively when something goes wrong, or you need to understand what's actually going on underneath the surface. And that's a structural change in risk, not just more of the same automation.
Good point.
So boards and regulators are now asking how identity governance extends beyond people. Vrinder, what's behind that scrutiny and how should organizations adapt their control frameworks?
Great question. The scrutiny is coming from the repeated mistakes again. So, repeated control failures. When you look at the recent deficiencies that you see in the media, right, and whether that's trade media, specifically related to this, or whether the general news, these Sarbanes-Oxley deficiencies, for example, and audit findings and fraud investigations, you within all of those, you see the same pattern. Orphan service accounts, configurations that have drifted without evidence, or wrappers that control what's gone on, long-lived integrations that, have gotten missed off the bottom of documentations, or nobody's owned them in the first place, and machine accounts that sit outside of normal reviews because of shadow AI or test systems that have been spun up as projects are delivered internally. And regulators, quite frankly, are no longer satisfied with the periodic snapshots and these testing of controls. They want continuous visibility into the who, the what, and the how is executing authority inside critical systems and organizations. And when you tell the board that a large share of execution in your ERP and critical business systems is performed by NHIs that are not certified, not mapped, I think they're starting to sweat at this point, not evaluated, they know there's a major governance failure right there sitting in front of them. And control frameworks therefore have to evolve from being about the user access reviews to being about the governance of authority, or authority governance, if you look at it like that. And that means governing everything that can execute authority, whether it's a person, a bot, or a very sophisticated API.
Yeah, that's Vrinder, good point. I just want to also add to that there's also new guidelines and expectations emerging from the standard setting bodies like the NIST, which we follow here, SafePaaS, closely. And it's around managing this diversity of identities that, Vrinder, you were just mentioning. It's the people, the devices, the APIs, the agents. We can go on. Under a unified governance framework, what we're seeing and what our view is that you have to start by defining ownership and accountability specifically for these new human identities that we're talking about here. So who's responsible for each of these identities? Who owns the data that it touches? Who signs off on this behavior? Right? And that's where asset style, RACI matrices come in, assigning responsibilities for managing and, quite frankly, accountability for those non-human workforce to specific humans, right? And the challenge we're seeing is the misalignment issue right now. IT teams may have a good understanding of these identities, but they often struggle to explain in terms of a business risk, the language that senior management understands to help them set enterprise-wide policies. And that gap leads to extremes, right? Either the board will simply just ban AI because they're so confused about the risks until they figure it out, or they allow a Wild West kind of an approach where every team experiments with little or no safeguards. So the answer is not to throw out existing governance frameworks, but to extend them thoughtfully to this new category of identities without shutting down innovation.
So you both mentioned invisible authority. When those identities fall through the cracks, Adil, what are the big cultural or governance gaps that let that happen?
Yeah, Jamie's a good question. At the core of all this, as you said, is the cultural issues, right? For years, our enterprise customers and folks we talk to in the industry have treated service accounts, APIs, and bots as technical plumbing, if you will, quote unquote, right? Not as some sort of authority that needs to be managed and respected. Service accounts get created during implementations. APIs are developed and deployed to speed up integration. Bots are introduced to improve efficiencies, but no guardrails historically have been put around, right? And so there's no business ownership. There's no accountability, attestation, evaluation of these, non-humans, if you will. And there's rarely any kind of a formal retirement process after the job is done. So when you don't treat these identities as first-class authorities, risk quietly accumulates. They become the most powerful and least reviewed identities in the enterprise. And that's how you end up with the unknown identities exercising invisible authority, generating unmeasured risk, uncertified access, and unattributed execution. So the authority without accountability is a control failure waiting to materialize.
Yep, that's right. That's right. We see this current state with many customers and many of the organizations that we talk to. They don't have a structured governance program for non-human identities. And often that's not even a recognition that these accounts, to your point, Adil, don't even know it was there. That these accounts should be governed under any kind of internal SLAs or ITO processes that are different from what they do today. It's a kind of operational convenience over policy type culture, right? Teams argue that rotating a key will break an integration or slow things down to a point where it's inconvenient or more than inconvenient for the way in which things are run and the speed of efficiency and delivery. And that restricting the bot will slow down a close, for example. So exceptions then become a norm, right? Shortcuts, which you can't really take in this world, especially when it comes to cyber and fraud. And that's precisely why this type of thing is occurring, he says, answering his own question, right? Recent fraud and data leaks occur in this ungoverned high-risk zone, right? Cyber criminals have figured out that hijacking APIs and exploiting unmanaged machine identities is often easier now than attacking the human users and finding out banking details, right? And who needs to sequence things together to get a payment to a bank. The transformation that is required here is to move these identities from being outside the SLA, unmanaged and very toxic to the business, into a structured governance framework with clear policies, delineation, and ownership and controls within that sits as a wrapper around the non-human identities and the machine identities.
Yeah.
So Vrinder, I'm sorry, Adil. Vrinder, when this non-human workforce is poorly governed, how does it show up as real business risk, like a misstatement or a fraud or a disruption? Can you elaborate a little?
Yes. Let me think about it. Yeah, right. Okay. So I think one of the clearest examples is journal posting bots. I think that's classic. If a separation of duties policy doesn't apply to that bot, it can effectively execute both sides of a control boundary, right? Initiating and posting the same transaction, approving itself almost, right? That's not just a technical policy violation, it's a breakdown in financial integrity, ultimately. The result is an audit finding, remediation costs, and potentially misreported financials, which I think as real costs to a business are often understated. Like the cost of those items to the business, like, some people refer to them as soft costs. They really, really aren't. And you have to consider that when you're looking at this, very costly. And so similarly, privileged service accounts can change posting period controls, approval thresholds, vendor payment parameters, right? Discounts, bulk discounts, tax configurations. Like nobody wants the man on their doorstep saying, I'm here to help, right? If configuration governance for those non-human identities isn't continuously monitored, you've created a pathway to failure. And that's a pathway to bypass internal controls, distort financial reporting and enable fraudulent payments at scale, right? Think of the Wirecard fraud, right? Classic example. And that's where IT control failures turn into audit failures and real money, substantial money leaves the building.
Yeah, so think of non-human identities as entities capable of running complex workloads end to end, right? I mean, a single bot, for example, just to extend on your thought earlier, Vrinder, is, give you an example. You can have a bot in today's AI world could help you improve your financial close process by posting GL transactions and also touching, let's say, the subledgers to going down to your AP ledger, your fixed assets, your revenue recognition logic, and so forth. So if it's the authority and it has the authority and it's not tightly scoped and monitored, it can unintentionally, or in some cases maliciously, if compromised, as Vrinder, you were alluding to, if the multiple parts of your financial story can create significant risks in the business. So the risk in translation is direct. Governance gaps around non-human identities can cause material misstatement of financial results, long-running operational issues, and sustained compliance problems. And that's why I believe, boards and CFOs especially need to see non-human identities as a key item for their governance, and not just as a IT hygiene issue, but as a core financial and operational risk that needs to be managed.
Great. Let's move to solutions. Vrinder, walk us through the core steps of a practical governance program for non-human identities.
Okay. So when I think about this, and what I'm seeing in terms of NHIs and governance programs, I think I see 5 practical steps. Step 1 is to absolutely create a cross-functional working group and agree on taxonomy. That's consistent definitions, naming conventions, structure, authorities, what's a service account, what's underneath it, responsibility, risk level, use cases under each of those APIs, bots, or agents, call it what you will. I mean, without that common language, you can't govern at scale. Yeah, you just can't, right? You need process and structure underneath this type of thing, as you would with human identity compliance. Step 2 is an exhaustive discovery and inventory. Inventory what you've got. Most leaders, even continuously today, are surprised when they see how many machine identities exist and who actually uses them. And without dwelling on this too much, it draws me back to a time in the early phases of digital compliance, post 2002, when there was this, how many roles have I got? These roles and orphaned roles sitting out there that kind of anyone could access. And if you had the knowledge, you could just pull them up, right? Same kind of context. So, you need to understand where these risk areas are and what actually exists in your machine identities. You can't just pull a report from a single system. It's enterprise-wide problem now. It spans your entire application surface, and that's on-prem, cloud, single-threaded, multi-cloud, third-party environments. And simply the volume and distribution of those items across an enterprise makes manual approaches unrealistic. So specialized discovery becomes essential, right? Partner with the business internally, right? Conduct your inventory and your knowledge pooling robustly. Step 3 is policy and RACI definition, right? That means formalizing the policies around registration. Who can bring an NHI to the business? Who then authenticates it? Who then authorizes it? Is there a secrets management file and life cycle, right? And, where do these sit in terms of responsibility, and you can see that information. And then when you've understood that, who is responsible, you can, when you've understood that structure, you can assign clearly who is responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed. And these are really important definitions because there's nuance in what you then see and contribute to that structure from within your organization. You want an identity management team that understands these policies and is empowered to enforce them, right? It's more than just understanding what policy is all about, but you also have to understand the bridge between the technical pieces of the applications that you're working with, right? What does it really mean under the covers? And demystifying that so that all the user types, your business users on the team, your technical users on the team, and your operational users on the team all move in tandem when the governance process and protocol shifts from static control lists to true behavioral oversight, right? Comparing design to actual behavior over time. And then step 4 is actually implementing the control and automation. So translating those policies into concrete automated controls, right? Unshiftable, unmutable. So you can sustainably manage growth and, control that scope creep that, sees itself in many projects, right? Have your hands around that. Nothing moves without proper authority approval for the people that are responsible or accountable, right? And then your oversight from those that are consulted and informed. And that therefore allows you to manage the secrets, the certificates, the workload identifiers, your just-in-time issuance, or the rotation of the identities tied to the specific workloads, including those AI agents, right? And the non-human identities. And then finally, step 5 is continuous monitoring and certification. You can't simply say, right, my human review process is, square peg, round hole type view, right? When you're at school, you've got the little box and you've got the shapes. And when you can, get the shapes in the box, you got irritated. But it doesn't work like that anymore, right? Complexity demands new approaches, modern solutions for modern problems. These new approaches need monitoring, anomaly detection, periodic certifications tailored to non-human identities.
Great.
You've both talked about treating them like a workforce with its own life cycle. What are the key checkpoints leaders need to get that right, Adil?
Yeah, a good question, Jamie. And so the goal is to enable, these non-human identities, especially the AI agents that Victor just talked through very well with the 5-step program. The goal is to deliver productivity through all this, right? And that will produce the outcomes and the gains. But we don't want to make it constrained using the human governance policies, which will stifle the benefits, right? So first, you still need humans to, take ownership. I've heard the term human in the middle with, guys, so that's part of the approach. So the accountability in today's world where AI is today is still with the humans. Who knows what happens in the next 10 years? But that's where we are today, right? So the concept of delegation of authority that's existed in the organization is very applicable to non-humans, which typically flows from the board down through executive management to the front lines. So I believe that same structure can be adapted to delegate the workloads to machines and bots. So an agent or a bot should have clear accountability coming from the humans, right? Humans should take the accountability for the assigned. We've also started to hear the word internally here at SafePaaS called sub-identities. So you humans, you have the identity, and all your AI agents have your sub-identity. And that's how we delegate the workloads out. So where we need to build some new thinking is in lifecycle management, like provisioning and privilege management of these AI agents. And these identities can then spawn other workloads, scale horizontally, operate continuously without the human constraints, which is where the gains will come from. So lifecycle checkpoints must include how identities are created and approved and how privileges are scoped and adjusted dynamically. So, that means workloads can change over time and we need to manage for that. And also when the work is completed, the concept of deprovisioning or retiring these AI agents is different because they work all the time. So it's not you're hiring and firing individuals. So we need to find new ways of dealing with that process of workload, onboarding and offboarding.
Yep. Yes. I think I'd like to break it down to 5 checkpoints, right? Plan and design. Define the purpose, risk classification and justification before creation, right? Creating provision, set risk aware access. And I'm definitely distilling it down here, right? It's more thought involved than this. Enforce least privilege and assign named ownership, right? That's the RACI sort of configuration. And then monitor and govern, right? Continuously compare behavior to design with automated alerts inserted, sort of these staging points or gates, right? Automated alerts and gates that when an identity drifts beyond its expected patterns, people are notified, right? Then there's change in versioning. When a bot or an API is updated or an agent's use case expands, right? Treat that as a governance and an event, not simply a technical one, right? Oh, look, I've done this, right? The shortcut, as it were. And then finally, decommissioning, an often brushed over aspect of this, right? Non-human identities need structural retirement, just like a human joiner, mover, leaver event, right? No anonymous machine accounts, no SOD exemptions, no unmanaged AP keys. And these are hard decision boundaries you have to make. No configuration changes without traceability, and no transaction authority without continuous validation, right? Have those appropriate gates or semantic, Monte Carlo type analysis that allows you to understand what they're truly doing. And then you treat them as real authorities, not just background scripts, which I think, is a hangover from an older technology day.
Yep.
Let's make this more concrete. Adil, how is SafePaaS evolving to support non-human identity governance, and what does a strong 90-day baseline look like?
Yeah, so I think there are two interesting questions there. So at SafePaaS, we've been in the policy-based governance business, and that's the platform we bring to the market and to our customers. And as Vrinder just outlined, the 5-step program, that's what is built into our DNA and our products and solutions. And our products are already, able to track things like elevated access for human users, and we're extending them now distinctly for rules that apply to what we have discussed today, which is the non-human identities lifecycle, which is different, right? So discovery, provisioning, monitoring, and certification, just to remind everybody those key elements of lifecycle management. So because our foundation is policy-based controls and governance, not just rigid roles, it sort of suits our clients to, apply that approach and take advantage of this dynamic capabilities that poses a risk in terms of AI workloads, and transform the business and specifically identities that change over the time. So that's kind of what we're doing. And then from your second question about a plan a client of SafePaaS might consider as a realistic 90-day plan is about building this governance discipline that we have mostly spent time talking about here, and not just the tooling, even though we have all that in place. But the first step we recommend is to think through those key stages of managing this new risk from discovery to monitoring. So you secure a cross-functional sponsorship from various teams. I'm seeing a new role emerging, a chief AI officer in some organizations. So if that's what you're doing, that's where it all comes together, the ownership for this type of a alignment. So that's part of your 90-day plan when we kick off this type of a governance, AI governance or NHI governance type initiative with our clients. And you focus on, the critical systems. So as you know, SafePaaS has been deeply involved with the most important mission critical systems the companies utilize to build, track, and report financial results. And those are your ERP systems, your supply chain, client management, customer management type systems. So you prove out your model and then expand after you've achieved success. And that's how you build trust and credibility in the 90-day that you start off with. You agree on taxonomy, perform focused discovery in the domain that you've picked, define initial policies and ownership. We talked a lot about RACI today. You be able to involve that level of detail. And then you can stand up automated NHI controls that can monitor these highest risk identities, right? That are about to come in the organization or already in. So you also want to be aggressive about milestones to get regular executive updates to keep the leadership engaged and provide them enough useful information to maintain their sponsorship and commitment, because it's going to take capital, it's going to need resources and attention from the top down. And that's what we would suggest, look at in the first 90 days and then use this opportunity to build the full rollout plan beyond the 90 days.
Yep.
Great. And for the audience listening and thinking, what do I do in the first week? What would you tell them to prioritize in their first month of the 90-day plan?
Boy, now we're getting really specific. So yeah, I think the first 30 days, let's just call it, I think you said, I'd focus on three things: alignment, scoping, and visibility. And let me tell you what that means, right? So alignment means getting the right people in the room. This should include folks from your security, IT operations, perhaps internal audit, and key stakeholders from, for example, finance and supply chain that literally make the back office run and key in reporting results to the market. So you need them to agree that non-human entities are not just a technical problem, but a governance challenge that ties directly to finance and operations well-being of the organization. So what does that mean? Scoping means picking one or two critical systems. We would recommend considering your ERP system, maybe some of your key SaaS platforms that are important for managing your business, and agreeing that this is where you'll prove the model. So once you get this consensus, then the visibility will come from done your first, discovery passes, right? Not to be perfect, but to get a defensible first cut of the non-human identities in those systems. And by the end of those 30 days, which is a very short time, you want the basic taxonomy, the nomenclature, the draft inventory, the accountability, named owners, for example, for the most powerful machine identities, which are these agents, the AI agents.
And then from 30 days to 90 days, Vrinder, how do organizations turn that early visibility into actual risk reduction?
Days 30 to 90s are about tightening the screws and battening down the hatches in my mind. You start enforcing the basic hygiene, right? You start removing the obvious, orphaned identities, elements that are not in scope for good reason or have been excluded, they shouldn't have been there in the first place, right? You right size the privileges, you use your RACI matrix, you understand what is excessive access and review access, right? It's all good and well having checks and balances and the gates, but too many will burden you, and paralysis through analysis will then drift down through the business, right? And so what you do then is you put monitoring on a small set of the high risk societies, technical, journal posting, payment runs, or technical configuration changes. And this is also the window to socialize the cultural change then, right? And this is why sponsorship of these projects and, the tone at the top is super important, right? Tone at the top is one of my favorites when it comes to compliance, right? And it applies here with this change. You talk to business owners about why that temporary service account that's been sitting there for 5 years and anybody in finance could roll into is now part of a control environment, right? And you can't just log in and wander over and see this and see that. You walk your audit and risk committees through the risks and new metrics, the number of NHIs discovered, the owners assigned, the violations reduced, the risk posture, therefore, what that really means in terms of tangible and intangible, right? We've mentioned that earlier on in this podcast, the real costs of failure here. And you run through real theatre, right? Like this is the pack that we will walk into our auditors meeting in. And and I'm paraphrasing it, right? This is what we'll walk into our risk committees with. This is what we'll hand our board and stress test it, right? And that stretch is where you turn that discovery, the work that you've done earlier, the heavy lifting into actual reduction of risk and true visibility of the embedding of non-human identity governance into your natural and normal operating rhythms.
Great. So what do you think is the single biggest essential must do for the non-human workforce in 2026? Adil?
Great.
Yeah, I think the nutshell of this whole podcast is that make the non-human identity policies living, right? Make them happen. And the way you make that happen is through continuously enforced, monitored, and tied back to business level authority, not just a technical setting.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Treat every non-human identity as an authority and smarter than you. Not a script, right? Automate ownership, baselines and ongoing validations. Give these bots, who you should assume have a lot more control than you think they have, right? And the APIs and the service accounts, the same respect you give to human identities. Yep, that's what I'd say.
Good.
And that brings us to the end of this episode of the SafePodcast. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time. Stay safe.